In this video, I'll be reviewing the 2016 Giant Anthem aluminum frame set. Now I say frame set because that's how I purchased this and that's how I'll be focusing this video. However, if you're looking for a complete Anthem, I think this video is going to be helpful for you as well. Now I got the 2016 Anthem aluminum frame to replace my 2014, and that's how I bought this one as well. So let's talk about why you would buy a frame only. There's two main reasons. One is because you're picky like me and you like to pick out the exact components and build it up to your exact specifications. The other one would be maybe you already have some components, you have your wheels or whatever, and you don't want to go out and buy a complete bike because you just want to transfer over the components. But for me, buying a frame is kind of like artwork. I'm not a very artsy type person or creative, but when I buy a bike frame and I put it together with everything that I want, it's kind of a work of art for me. So I love building bikes from the ground up, mainly my cross-country bike. Out of my whole fleet, that's the only bike that I usually buy as a frame only and build up because, again, with my cross-country bike, I'm very picky about the components that I put on it. The aluminum frame set from Giant for 2016 retails for about $16.50. Now I like the aluminum for the main reason that I want to put more of my money into the wheels. I have a set of carbon, the Stan's Valor wheels, which I love those wheels, and I think putting more money into the wheels pays off more than putting money into a carbon frame. Also, as I mentioned in my other videos, I really like Fox shocks, and the carbon frame comes with the rock shocks, so that's why I got the aluminum. Now if you are in the market for an aluminum Anthem, you really only have two choices: the Anthem 27.5 2 or the Anthem frame set. Now you can also get the Anthem SX, but that's a little bit different model in the fact that it has a longer fork, a 120 fork, a dropper seat post. So if you're looking for a 100mm travel Anthem, there's only two ways you can go. But I do want to say something that I think is important with bike companies, kind of my philosophy, and that is that I applaud Giant for offering frame sets for a pretty reasonable price, and that you can get the aluminum for $16.50 US, or you can get the carbon frame set for $2,700 US. And like I said, I really appreciate them doing that. And I did some comparison with some other big brands, and I've mentioned this in one of my other videos a while ago, but let's just talk about this for a second, because this is one of those things that really irks me sometimes with bike companies when they don't offer reasonable frame sets. So let's mention one here, Specialized. So if you wanted to go out and buy a cross-country full suspension Specialized and build it up as a frame only, you're going to spend at least $5,700 because you have to get the fork, and they don't offer an aluminum Epic. And so and there's also another one that's $6,000. So there's not too many people are going to want to go out and build a bike from the frame up and spend $5,700 on the frame. Trek does offer, and I'm talking about the big brands here. One thing that I appreciate about the more boutique brands like Niner, Santa Cruz, things like that, even Turner and Pivot, you can get frame sets, which I really appreciate that. But you can get a Top Fuel. You can get that for $3,300, so at least you can get the frame set. You can't really get an aluminum, and Cannondale doesn't even offer frame sets in their cross-country full suspension. So I just wanted to say that because I really appreciate Giant's philosophy in offering frame sets that you can build up. Okay, so that's enough of my rant. Let's get into this bike. Alright, so this frame set comes with the head cups already installed. It comes with your headset bearings, and it comes with 4 or 5 spacers already with the headset, so that's nice. It comes with the Fox Float DPS shock, and I've done a separate review on this shock, but I do want to talk about it in this video because it's a really great addition for this bike. If you buy the other aluminum, the complete Giant 27.5 aluminum, which is this the 27.5 2, you get a Fox shock, but it's the performance Fox will offer two levels of their shocks. One is the factory series, the other is the performance series. So you get an upgraded shock if you buy the aluminum frame set as opposed to buying the complete bike. So before I go into the shock, let me complete talking about what you get with this bike. You get several different adapters to be able to run this bike in different configurations. I obviously have this set up as a 1x, and this is currently a 1x10. I might actually upgrade it to a 1x11 soon. But you get this plate. This is where the front derailleur would go if you wanted to run the front derailleur. So this comes with this little screw and a plate to just cover it up and protect it if you're not running a front derailleur. So that's really cool. You get all kinds of different plugs. And so since I have two cables going through, and I, by the way, ran the cable, the brake line through the frame, which means that you have to cut the line and run it through and then bleed your brakes. So it takes more time. Now, if you didn't want to do that, it's really cool that Giant puts bosses on the frame so you could run the brake cable down along the frame. And you'll see here I have the brake cable and the rear derailleur coming out here, which is where you typically run it. So if you didn't want to run the brake cable through the frame, you could just use these bosses and run it back here. And I will say this is probably one of the easiest frames that I've built up, especially in getting the lines through. So it comes with these plugs, and you know what I'll do is I'll pull this plug out if I can, and I'll show you how big these holes are that you can run the cables through. Okay, so I had to work that out with my fingernails, but you can see how big these are, and it's so easy to drop lines through, bring them out, and then put your plugs in. Now, if you build one of these up, what you want to make sure you do is these plugs are not slotted, so you actually have to run the cables through the plugs. So you want to do that as you're installing the cables. So you would slip it around the plug and then run the cables through the frame and then put your plugs in. So it's really cool that Giant offers all these little plugs. So they have plugs that have single cables coming through, so if you didn't want to run the brake line through the frame, they've got the one for the double cable like I ran here. They've got several blank plugs like the ones I pulled out of the frame. In fact, there's one underneath, if you can see that. So you could even set this up as a single speed and not run any cables through the frame. They give you enough blank plugs that you can do that. So it's good that Giant offers all these ways to build up the frame. It also comes obviously with your seat post collar, and that's already installed. I weighed the frame I should say, before I built it up, and it came in about 5.7 pounds. That was with the seat post collar and with the head cups installed. If you did want to install a front derailleur, you typically would bring it in here, so it's coming in from the left side around the frame into here, and then it's going to come out the bottom where I showed that blank plug, and then you've got a boss here where the cable would terminate, and then you run it up to the front derailleur, which would be a bottom pull front derailleur. Now this frame comes as standard with a 142x12 through axle. You could convert it. You can get a kit from Giant if you needed to go to a 135 quick release, but pretty much everything now is going to 142x12, even 148 coming out. It'd be nice if the mountain bike industry would settle on a standard, but until we do, this is what we deal with. But I think it's awesome that they did that. Now, if you look at the Giant 2014 frame, when I got this, it came standard as a 135, and I had to buy the kit and the axle, and the axles are not cheap. They're pretty expensive, like 50 bucks. So this frame comes with the axle, and like I said, already with the kit for the 142x12. The rear brake for this frame is a minimum of a 160 rotor, so I do have a 160 rotor on this bike. It's a post mount, and that's about as low as you can go. I don't think you could go below a 160, and you could of course go higher with a different set of screws for your brake caliper, and of course the spacers to bring it up. But I think for cross-country use, a 160 rear is what most people are going to run. This frame does come with a chainstay protector. I put my own over top of it just to add extra protection, because I like protecting it as close to the bottom bracket as I can. And it looks just like the one that was on the 2014, and I did the same thing. And you can see the chainstay on my 2014. I ran this bike for almost 2 years, and there are no chain slap marks on the chainstay protector or the chainstay. So my little protector that looks pretty gaudy, as most people have commented, it does work, and it is cheap and just adds that extra protection. And while I'm showing the chainstay, you can see that I ran the rear derailleur cable through the frame here, and it comes out the back here, and it was pretty easy to get it through. You can see how big that slot is. So like I said, this is a very easy frame to build up. It's one of the easiest ones that I've done. So good job, Giant, for making a frame that's not a bear to build up and run cables through. This bike has one water bottle mount. You obviously cannot put two in the triangle because of the shock, and there is no mount underneath. And the bike uses a BB92 bottom bracket, so that's going to be for a 24mm crank spindle, and it's a press fit. It's not threaded. Now I'll go more into how the bike rides, and this is where this video is probably going to be helpful for you who are looking for a complete Anthem, because the geometry is the same for all of the Anthems, whether it's the carbon or the aluminum. Now of course the SX is the same frame, but the geometry numbers change because you're running a longer fork, which I'll talk about here in a minute, because I actually did run a 120 on this bike when I first got it. But let me talk about the geometry. The head angle on this bike is a 69.5. The seat angle is a 73. This is a medium, by the way, and I'm 5'8.5", and medium Giants fit me perfect. I run a 90mm stem. I could probably run an 80 and be okay, but I run a 90 just because I've had this stem for a while. It's a pretty light stem. The wheelbase on this medium is a 43.3. That'll change depending on the size. And this has a standover height of 29.3 for the medium. But the magic of this bike is the chainstay length. It's a 17-inch chainstay. Now if you're familiar with the Giant 29ers, which I had, that had an 18.2-inch chainstay. The thing was a boat. It handled pretty good. It was a very stable bike, rolled very smooth, but the chainstay was too long for me, and it just took away from the playfulness of the bike. The beauty of 27.5-inch wheels is that you can have a full suspension and still have short chainstays, which makes this bike extremely playful. And I've said this before, I've got to say it again, that the Giant Anthem 27.5 is one of the most balanced bikes that I've ridden. Giant just absolutely has the geometry numbers nailed down. The head angle, the seat angle, the wheelbase, and the chainstay. Those are the ones that really make a difference in how this bike rides. With the shorter chainstay, you feel like you have more control over the rear end of the bike. So when you're going into a turn, when you're turning the front end, you also feel like you're controlling and turning the rear end. Slides are very controllable. On my Anthem 29er, when I went into a slide with the rear wheel, it was very hard to control. I washed the rear and the front wheel out several times. On this bike, I've gotten into some situations where I slide the bike. Feels like it's almost all the way sideways. It's probably not, but I'm able to control the bike. So steering input, again with the short chainstays, steering input not only affects the front end really well, it also affects the rear of the bike. This frame is also stiff as well. When I built up my 2014 Giant Anthem 27.5, I had Stan's podium wheels, and the bike had some flex to it, and I thought it was the frame, but when I put on the Stan's Valor carbons, which I put on the 2014 before I built this one up, it just totally, I'm not going to say change, but really enhanced the ride quality and made the precision of this bike just really increase. So that helped me to understand that the aluminum frame is actually very stiff. And the nice thing about carbon is that it absorbs trail chatter. But with a full suspension bike, your number one defense against bumps is your tires. So tire pressure is critical in mountain biking, but then you also have your suspension. So with a full suspension mountain bike, you don't feel like the aluminum is a harsh ride as it would be on, let's say, an aluminum gravel bike or cyclocross bike, where you don't have thick tires and you definitely don't have suspension. So with the big tires and suspension, you can get away with an aluminum frame without it feeling like it's a harsh ride. So as I mentioned a minute ago, I did put a 120 fork. So this is actually the Fox Float 120 that is the same cost and about the same weight as the 100. So I got the 120, and I also bought the air spring assembly to put it at 100. And the reason I did that, if you've seen my other video on when I did that, it makes the bike more versatile, so I have more options. I pretty much knew I would keep this bike at 100, but I wanted to try the 120. And I would say if you're buying this frame and you're also buying a fork, I would say get the 120 to give you more options. Riding with the 120 made the bike feel more steady, and it made it feel a little bit more confident on downhills. And the fork obviously made the front end more plush, but when you do that, it kind of makes the whole bike feel more plush. It makes the rear end feel more plush. And obviously you're not adding travel to the rear end, but it just gives it that kind of feeling, because when you're hitting bumps and taking that initial hit with the front end with a longer travel fork, it's going to make the bike feel just overall more plush. But I spaced it back down to 100 because I also have a Trance. And so I didn't need a bike that could do everything. I have my Trance for doing, fast downhills in the mountains or real aggressive riding over rough terrain. Whereas this is more my cross-country bike, and I want it to feel really light and agile and fast. And you can go back and watch my video of the 100 versus the 120 on the Anthem to really go into detail of that, so I won't really go much more into that, but I'll just say that the bike does feel more snappy and more agile, and you can ride turns quicker with the 100, even though you give up some stability. Going back to the rear shock, I am really liking this new DPS shock. DPS stands for dual piston system. I did a full review on this shock that you can go back and watch, but let's talk about the ride characteristics of this shock, because it's a little bit different than the CTD shock that I had on my 2014. This shock, when it's all the way over to the drive side, over to the right, is fully locked out. My 2014 frame, it still moved a little bit. This is completely rigid, and I only use that on dirt roads, on pavement. If I'm on the trail, I never use that setting. So I'm either keeping it in the middle or keeping it all the way over to the left, the non-drive side. This DPS shock has an adjustment on the open setting. So if it's all the way over to the left, that's considered fully open, and you've got 3 levels of firmness that you can do on that open setting. I typically run it on number 2. That feels the most like my CTD shock when it was in the middle, and that's what I've gotten used to. If you run it all the way over to the open setting, the bike has better braking performance, and it will bob a little bit, and pedal bob is really not from the force of the pedals, but it's more of your weight moving up and down. And you really notice this if you're on pavement. If you're on the trail, it's not noticeable hardly at all. So if I want to ride aggressively on downhills and have really good braking performance, I leave it in the open setting and I leave it on number 2. The middle setting took me a little while to get used to because it was more firm than the CTD shock on my 2014. But I really have grown to appreciate the middle setting, because when you're pedaling, the shock with your pedal bob does not move at all. Your weight bouncing up and down will not really move the shock. I mean, it might move like a millimeter, but it feels really firm in the middle setting. But the nice thing about this is, with it in the middle setting, when you hit a bump, this shock will open up, and it opens up really well. And I'll make a little reference here for those of you who have ever ridden a Specialized Epic. I had several Epics in the past. I had some problems with it, but there were some things that I really liked about the Epic, and that is the fact the shock felt really firm, but when you hit a bump, the shock just completely opened up and absorbed the bump. This shock is actually the closest Fox shock that wasn't an Epic shock that feels like that. It feels really firm, and when you hit a bump, it opens up. It's not quite as dramatic as the Epic, but it's close, and so I really appreciate that about this shock. The nice thing about the Maestro suspension is that you can run this shock in the open setting and still have a really firm pedaling platform, especially when you're sprinting, so that when you start to put some really strong chain tension on the bike, the Maestro suspension will stiffen up a little bit, which is the way it should be. You want a bike to be a little bit stiffer when you're pedaling hard, and when you stop pedaling is when you're either going down a hill or maybe hitting a hard bump, and that's when the suspension opens up a little bit. So it's really nice to be able to run a shock more in the open position, because like I said, you get better braking performance. So you can brake harder and later into a turn with the shock more open, because the wheel hugs the ground. So the more movement in the shock, the more the wheel is going to be able to follow the contour of the ground. In the middle setting, I kind of feel like the wheel is skipping a little bit on the ground, and you really notice that if you're coming into stutter bumps and you're braking hard over roots or ground that's kind of uneven. The wheel can stiffen up a little bit, and just a split second of losing braking power can mean you go uncontrolled into a turn because you're just coming in too hot. So I say that to say that I generally will run this shock over in the open setting and take advantage of the Maestro suspension. And I will say one more thing that I did not mention when talking about the factory and the performance shocks is the factory series comes with the Kashima coating. So this gold kind of coating on here makes for a smoother surface and makes for a smoother shock. Do I notice a big difference? Not really. My 2014 didn't have Kashima coating, and that was still a very smooth shock. I mentioned this in my review of the shock, but one thing I like about these is how easy it is to do air sleeve maintenance. You really just pull the shock off the bike, unscrew this canister, clean it out a little bit, put some more float fluid, and I do that every 3, 4, 5 months depending on how much I've been riding the bike. But it keeps the shock smooth. So I had the shock on my 2014 running really smooth, but it is nice to have the Kashima coating, and it looks pretty cool too. So that's going to wrap it up for this review of the Giant Anthem 27.5 aluminum. Building a bike from the frame up is not for everybody, but if you are wanting to do that, like I said before, the Giant Anthem is a good one to do that because you can get the aluminum or the carbon. They're not that crazy expensive, and it's a bike that whether you're buying the frame only or the complete bike, you're going to find the Anthem 27.5 a very fun cross-country bike. With it being full suspension, you're going to be able to have a bike that's a little bit more versatile, so you can easily ride it in the mountains as a trail bike, as a shorter travel but very capable trail bike that's going to climb extremely well. It's going to be a bike that is agile, that's just fun to ride. The chain stays, like I mentioned, make that happen, make the bike just one that's really controllable. It's got great acceleration. The 27.5-inch wheels make for a bike that accelerates really well, and also a bike that's agile. I've ridden 29, I've ridden 27.5, I've owned several 29ers from cross country to more trail bike. I prefer now the 27.5-inch wheels because of the agility and the fun factor. For cross country, I could go either way. I could go 29 or 27.5. They both have their pluses and minuses. If you ride trails that are real straight, then a 29 is going to hold momentum really well. If you like that, just moving the bike around real quick, just going from turn to turn real fast, if your trails are tight and twisty, if you just like a bike that's going to accelerate really quickly, then 27.5, they have some really good advantages. So if you like this video and it's helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks for watching.